Hi, thanks for joining us today. Zoe and I wanted to take you through a few questions that you can use at the close of a coaching-based conversation. So to start with, here's one. The obvious one really is, what are you taking away from our conversation today?
Yeah, and I love closing questions because often when you've been in the session yourself, as the coach, you don't really know what they're taking away. There could have been lots of different aha moments throughout the session. And I think we've all often talked, haven't we, that sometimes the
Yeah,
one thing the client takes away, you haven't even registered. So
it's not what you consider to be your best work.
no, but it's real. I love closing questions because it's also like coaching's lonely, isn't it? You know, when you're in a coaching conversation, it's only you and your client. You don't really know how it's being received. So it's validation, it's closing for the client. They're able to really reflect and evaluate what's gone on in the session, what's helpful for them, what they're taking away. But also for you as the coach, it's closure for you because you know what the client's
Yeah,
taking. They have some value. You can walk away from that session and take the learning and park it. There's no need to go over it in your mind. So closing questions,
yeah,
yeah, really important part of coaching.
yeah. So what are you taking away? And another variant on that, based on what we were just talking about there, is what's been most valuable for you in our conversation today?
Mm,
And often when there are people that are training, they're training with us as coaches, they're having supervision with us, and they say, I don't know if I don't know if I really did a good job. So
mm.
asking those questions is part of you getting feedback, as well as for the person that you're talking to, really kind of realizing and appreciating the value that there was, and that it is their responsibility to also identify and find the value in the
Yeah,
conversation.
definitely. Oh, sorry, bear with me. Error message pop up on my screen. So another one that I quite like is just what have you learned? You know, particularly if it's been a session of back and forth and reflecting on things and taking lots of different nuggets forward. I think just a recap on, okay, so what have you learned? You may have already set your goals and your actions, and that's fine. The client knows they're committed to them. So just to close off, so what have you learned today? I think it's just a nice way for the client to be able to consolidate that learning as well.
Yeah, and the learning question is also about, these questions are about future pacing. So I've got something from this conversation that I can use many times over outside of this conversation. So the value wasn't just in the moment, it's also that I can use outside of it. And if you're working with a client who has strengths around learning or passion around learning, that would be a good question to use, because
Mm,
you're playing into the things that are important to them and using language that resonates with them. So it's good for rapport.
yeah,
What's
definitely.
clear for you that wasn't clear before
Yeah.
is another good question, because sometimes, in a conversation, the other person might come to the conversation confused, feeling a bit foggy. They might be a visual thinker, so using that visual can
Yeah.
really help. It's
And
almost like the windscreen wipers, cleaning it off. What can you see now that you couldn't see before would be another way to phrase that.
And I think those ones are good if you're working with clients on clarity goals. People who come to coaching are just unclear what I want from my career, or I don't know what I want to do next. Yeah, focusing in on clarity at the end of each session helps them to consolidate that. What else have I got down here? What have you let go of? That's sometimes a nice question, particularly for clients coming into a session who may be fired up or frustrated or angry. I often find coaching, so when I'm in coaching or in supervision myself, literally the coaching is almost a container for me to be able to like drop stuff in and leave behind. And I often leave my sessions feeling like I've completely just let go of whatever pent up, frustration, anger, emotion that I brought into that session. It's almost a replenishing space. So what have you let go of, I think, is a nice question for people who seem to have that.
Yeah, and if you've been doing some work with a client, changing, doing some belief change work, what have you let go of would be a reference to like the limiting beliefs that you might have been
Yeah,
exploring in that session.
yeah.
And also it gives a lightness, so enables them to walk out with a feeling like a weight has been lifted from them.
And of course, actually, if you dig into that question, it's a presupposition, isn't it? Like, what have you let go of? You're basically saying to the client, let it go, leave it here, walk away without it on your shoulders. So it's a nice
Yeah, you have
resourcing
let go of something.
question. Yeah.
So what was a pivotal moment in our conversation today? Has that kind of laser focus around when was that point when something changed, for you?
Yeah.
So it depends on the nature of the conversation, obviously, as to the closing question that's going to be most relevant to use. But if you feel in that conversation you've sensed a shift in the other person, then that would be a good context to use that question in.
Yeah. So I think closing questions, as I said at the start, they're powerful because I think a lot of coaches struggle with endings, knowing when is the right moment to end a session. How long do you keep the session going for? And of course, you might have a coaching structure that you're following, like Grow or like Clear, videos that we've done in the past. But when you get to the end, there can still be this lingering moment of like, oh, bye then. Like, how do you do it? And I think a nice wrapping up question signals to both you and the client that that's the final part of the session, and you can both then move on. So I find them useful for wrapping up and signaling as well.
Yeah. So what will make the biggest difference to you over the next week is then orienting. It's almost turning them from reflecting on the session back into, okay, so now what am I going to do differently as a result of the conversation that we've had today? And as part of that checkout, you might also ask, how are you leaving? So for somebody, where feelings are important to discuss and to check in, and how are you leaving is a really open question. That's what I like about that.
Yeah.
But as you were saying about the wrap up, the other thing is that sometimes you just need to be aware of what you might be opening with the leaving question, because in some conversations when you ask one of these questions, it is going to open up something else. But for me, the final bit that I always say is thank you.
Yeah.
There's always an exchange of gratitude, I think, between like the coachee and myself.
Yeah.
And it does still genuinely always feel like a privilege to have had that confidential conversation, where you're creating a safe space for that other person. And it's such a trusting relationship that resources both the coach and the coachee in a healthy relationship. So I'm sure you can think of other closing questions too. Feel free to post them, under the video or in the coaching crowd. So if you're watching this on YouTube, and please come and join us in the coaching crowd over on Facebook, free and closed group. If you're with us in the coaching crowd, if you haven't yet already found the video tab on the left-hand side, go over, click on that, and you'll see some other videos like this that we hope you'll find useful. And let us know if there's anything that we haven't covered yet that you would like us to do.
Brilliant. Take care, guys.